Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Sophocles as a playwright. So Sophocles was a 5th century BCE Athenian playwright. He lived a very long life, probably into his 90s. He wrote 120-some plays, 7 of which survive. I've done videos on all of them, so you can check those out elsewhere on my channel. But Sophocles is probably the most... In some ways, Sophocles is the most complex of the 3 Greek tragedians whose work survives. I don't like making that claim because it's a difficult claim, but I think Sophocles is extremely sophisticated in the ways in which he challenges our thinking about heroes, the ways in which he challenges our thinking about myths, the ways in which he complicates particular figures. So we can see that especially, I think, in a play like Electra, where much of the focus of that play is actually on the sort of irony of Electra and Clytemnestra mirroring one another. So in that play, Electra wants her brother Orestes to take revenge on their mother Clytemnestra for murdering their father Agamemnon. But unlike in Aeschylus's Oresteia, or even in Euripides' Electra, in Sophocles, Electra is very, very similar to Clytemnestra. The justifications for violence are almost identical. Their ruthlessness is almost identical. Their faith that what they are doing is fair and just retribution for a previous murder is pretty much identical. And so Electra typically is seen as the hero. She's typically seen as the positive figure, whereas Clytemnestra is the villain. Sophocles makes that more tenuous. It's not clear in Sophocles that Electra is a good character and Clytemnestra is a bad character. Or if they are, he raises really complicated questions about why. What actually distinguishes them? It's not really clear for Sophocles. Similarly, in a play like Philoctetes, we have complex questions about ethics. We have complex questions about good and evil because initially Neoptolemus, who's basically the protagonist of the play, goes along with Odysseus's plan to steal Philoctetes' magic bow and leave him stranded on the island to die. It's only later that Neoptolemus changes his mind. But even when he changes his mind, he's not, like, they need Philoctetes and the bow to come back to Troy, but Neoptolemus is not able to convince Philoctetes of this. Like, if this were Aeschylus, we would think that Neoptolemus would make a great, compelling argument and Philoctetes would agree, but he doesn't. That's not what happens. What happens is that Heracles comes from the heavens as literally a deus ex machina, a god brought in on what was called the Mechane, which was basically a sort of giant crane thing that would carry gods and whatever it is. Heracles comes in and says, "Hey, Philoctetes, you are fated to go to Troy, so go. And that's the end of the play. Like, and I actually don't think it's a good play for that reason, but it signals this complexity, this ethical complexity, and this interrogation that Sophocles has of the ways in which characters work in myth and in tragedy, because it raises these ethical questions. Is Neoptolemus a good character because he repents and brings the bow back to Philoctetes? Is he a bad character because he steals the bow in the first place? Does the fact that Heracles needs to come in to convince Philoctetes to go to Troy, does that signal that Neoptolemus is still an ethical failure in some way, that he hasn't yet redeemed himself? It's hard to tell. So that's one of the things that I think really marks Sophocles' work, is this ethical complexity and this continual questioning of the morality of characters in a very sophisticated way. The other thing that I think is really noteworthy about Sophocles is that he is probably the most Aristotelian of the big three, which of course is ironic because Aristotle doesn't write the Poetics, where he sort of catalogs what tragedy is. Stay tuned for next week. I will be making a video on the Poetics. But Aristotle doesn't write the Poetics for almost a century after the golden age of Attic tragedy. So Sophocles, Euripides, Aeschylus are dead and gone by the time that Aristotle writes the Poetics, and their plays are golden oldies. But Aristotle's Poetics seems to largely draw from Sophocles as this sort of ideal playwright. And so retroactively, we can say Sophocles is the most Aristotelian playwright, although really Aristotle is maybe the most Sophoclean theater critic of the Hellenistic age. But what I mean by this is that Sophocles' plays often run on the economy of a tragic hero, a central figure who is admirable but not perfect, and who falls due to some sort of tragic mistake, what we would call hamartia, a tragic error. So obviously, Oedipus the King is the most prominent example of this. That's the play that Aristotle says is the most perfect play that's ever been written. Oedipus. Oedipus is an admirable king, a good guy, basically, doing a good job ruling Thebes, but his intransigent desire to know, his dedication to finding truth is a tragic error. He should stop when he's told to stop by Tiresias, by Jocasta, by the messenger, by the shepherd. He should stop pursuing when he's told to stop pursuing, but he doesn't. He chooses not to. Some would say he doesn't choose. He's fated to, and that's fine. But regardless of whether he's fated to or he chooses to, he pursues this knowledge and it ends up destroying him. We get the same kind of thing in Antigone, with both Creon and Antigone, I would argue. They both have this element of tragic heroism where they make some sort of mistake. And actually, this is more evident with Creon than it is with Antigone, because with Antigone, we never have the recognition and the reversal. We have there's a sort of reversal, but considering she starts the play basically being like, hey, it'd be great to die burying my brother, it's not really clear that she ever has a sort of recognition or even a real reversal, in the sense that that being condemned to die is not a reversal of her fortune, since that seems to be what she seeks. Whereas for Creon, he wants to be a good king. He wants to rule the state effectively, and he has a philosophy for how he thinks he needs to do that. But that philosophy and the refusal to compromise initially, although, again, as I point out in my video on Antigone, he does actually compromise quite a bit. But that refusal to compromise leads to the reversal of fortune, which is one of the plot elements that Aristotle talks about when Antigone kills herself in the cave and Haemon, Creon's son, kills himself as well. And then Creon's wife kills herself. So we have that reversal of fortune. And Creon internalizes this. We have the recognition, which again is another key plot point in Aristotelian tragedy, the Aristotelian system of tragedy. We have a character who is to some degree admirable, although whether Creon's admirable at the beginning is a sort of open debate. But he commits a tragic error. His fortune declines. There's a reversal and a decline, and then a recognition of responsibility. So Creon is the tragic hero of Antigone at the end of the day, if we look at it in that Aristotelian lens. But again, that's something that Sophocles does. Sophocles uses this sort of Aristotelian formula, I think certainly more than Aeschylus, but also more than Euripides, although Euripides does it as well. And so I think that's another sort of crucial thing about Sophocles, is his plays have this distinct tragic structure, and they make sense to us as post-Aristotelian readers because he follows a model that we recognize as the foundation of tragedy. And it's partially the foundation of tragedy because Aristotle later comes along and says, this is the foundation of tragedy. And then that idea gains tremendous currency for theater scholars, classicists, etc., later on.